In the quiet New England town of Salem, Massachusetts, history dripped from every cobblestone street and hung heavy in the mist that rolled in from the nearby forests. Salem had become a hub for ghost tours and thrill seekers, but beneath the kitschy veneer of witch-themed restaurants and souvenir shops lay the scars of a horrifying chapter in American history, the Salem witch trials of 1692. What few dared to explore, however, was the enduring curse whispered to linger in the shadow of those grim events, a curse that seemed to awaken every generation, ensnaring the unsuspecting in its web of terror. This story begins with the discovery of an old journal buried in a house that had stood since the 17th century. It was the journal of Abigail Bishop, a young woman accused of witchcraft during the trials. What was written inside would unravel a tale of horror that spanned centuries. Emma Hastings, a history graduate from Boston, had a knack for uncovering hidden treasures. Her love for history had landed her an internship cataloging artifacts in one of Salem's oldest homes, the Bishop House. The house, purportedly haunted, had fallen into disrepair and was slated to become a museum. While clearing out an old chest in the attic, Emma stumbled upon a leather-bound journal. The cover was brittle, the pages yellowed with age. The handwriting inside was elegant but uneven, as though penned in fear or haste. Abigail's words leapt off the page. "They came for me in the dead of night. The accusations are false, but the forest holds truths that even I cannot utter aloud. Something watches from the woods, and its hunger is insatiable." Chills coursed through Emma's spine. Her hands trembled as she turned the pages. The journal detailed Abigail's descent into paranoia as the trials consumed Salem. But what struck Emma was not the historical account. It was the cryptic mentions of something lurking beyond the human realm. Emma couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She began to dream about the forest Abigail described, a place of gnarled trees and whispering shadows. Each night she woke drenched in sweat, her mind filled with echoes of distant screams. She shared the journal with her friend Nathan, a local archivist with a fascination for Salem's darker history. "This is incredible," Nathan said, flipping through the pages. "But this part here, the forest watches through blackened eyes and it knows your name, sounds like folklore." "It doesn't feel like folklore," Emma replied, her voice shaking. "It feels real." Nathan laughed nervously. "Maybe we should check it out." Against her better judgment, Emma agreed. Nathan insisted on filming their exploration for his Paranormal YouTube channel. The two ventured into the forest late one foggy afternoon, following an old map sketched in Abigail's journal. The woods felt oppressive, as though the trees leaned closer with each step they took. The deeper they ventured, the darker it became. The usual sounds of the forest, chirping birds, rustling leaves, were absent. Instead, the silence was pierced by faint whispers that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Do you hear that?" Emma whispered. Nathan nodded, his face pale. "It's probably the wind." But they both knew better. At the heart of the forest, they found a clearing. In its center stood a massive oak tree, its trunk scarred with strange symbols that matched drawings in Abigail's journal. Beneath the tree lay a ring of blackened soil, as though the ground itself had been burned. Nathan knelt to examine the symbols, his camera trained on the markings. "This is some kind of ritual site," he muttered, "but it doesn't match any known Salem artifacts." Emma felt an icy breath against her neck. She turned sharply but saw nothing. "We shouldn't be here," she said, her voice quaking. "Let's go back." But as they turned to leave, Emma screamed. A deep, guttural growl erupted from the darkness. A figure emerged. A gaunt, shadowy form with hollow eyes that seemed to devour the light. The air grew suffocatingly cold. Emma and Nathan bolted, their flashlight beams bouncing wildly as they sprinted through the woods. They made it back to town, but something was wrong. Emma felt a strange burning sensation on her forearm. Pulling up her sleeve, she found a symbol etched into her skin, matching those on the tree. "I didn't touch anything," she whispered. Nathan tried to laugh it off, but his hands trembled as he reviewed the footage. The camera had captured something, a fleeting glimpse of the shadowy figure, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "Whatever we saw, it's not human," Nathan said, his voice cracking. Over the following days, Emma's life unraveled. She saw shadowy figures in her apartment, heard whispers calling her name, and felt an overwhelming dread she couldn't explain. Nathan fared no better. His dreams were plagued by the hollow-eyed creature, and he began to hear scratching at his windows at night, despite living on the third floor. Emma returned to the journal, desperate for answers. Abigail had written of similar experiences: the mark, the hauntings, and the growing madness. Abigail had tried to break the curse through rituals, but her efforts only seemed to anger whatever force stalked her. Emma contacted a local historian who specialized in Salem's supernatural lore. The historian, an older woman named Margaret, listened intently as Emma recounted their experience. "You've disturbed something ancient," Margaret said gravely. "The forest was said to be cursed long before the trials. It's tied to the hysteria of 1692. People claim to see witches in the woods, but I think they saw something much worse." "Can we stop it?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. Margaret hesitated. "There's a ritual, but it's dangerous. And if it fails, the consequences will be dire." Emma and Nathan were left with a choice: risk the ritual or live in fear of the phantom that now consumed their lives. The days after Emma and Nathan's encounter in the forest were a waking nightmare. The shadowy figure haunted their dreams and waking hours alike, its hollow eyes burning into their souls. Every whisper of wind carried its voice, every flicker of shadow a reminder that they had trespassed where they did not belong. Emma clutched Abigail Bishop's journal like a lifeline, poring over its cryptic entries in the hope of finding salvation. But the deeper she read, the more she realized the horrors Abigail described were not isolated to her time. They were a cycle, repeating every generation. And now, Emma and Nathan were the latest victims. Margaret, the historian, had provided a glimmer of hope in the form of a ritual. But her warning echoed in Emma's mind. If it fails, the consequences will be dire. "It's our only chance," Emma said, her voice trembling as she sat across from Nathan in her dimly lit apartment. The shadows seemed to cling to the corners of the room, refusing to dissipate even in the light of day. Nathan's face was pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights. "What if we make it worse?" Emma's gaze fell to her arm, where the burned symbol etched itself deeper into her skin with each passing day. "It's already worse." Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Fine, what do we need?" Abigail's journal contained a crude diagram of the ritual site and a list of materials: candles, herbs, and an incantation scrawled in a language neither Emma nor Nathan could decipher. Margaret offered to help, but her reluctance was palpable. "This ritual isn't a guarantee," she said as she handed Emma a bundle of dried sage and a weathered book of translations. "It's a negotiation, and the entity you're bargaining with doesn't play fair." The forest loomed like a black wall against the twilight sky as Emma, Nathan, and Margaret approached the clearing. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though unseen hands pulled them back. The whispers had returned, louder now, filling their ears with incomprehensible murmurs. At the heart of the forest, the oak tree stood like a sentinel, its scarred trunk gleaming in the moonlight. The burned soil around it seemed to pulse faintly, as though alive. Margaret lit the candles and arranged them in a circle, her hands trembling. "Once we start, there's no turning back." Nathan held the camera, his knuckles white against the grip. "Do we even know what we're summoning?" "No," Margaret said bluntly. "But it's not the summoning that concerns me. It's whether we can survive what comes next." Emma swallowed hard and stepped into the circle. She opened the journal to the page marked with Abigail's instructions and began to chant the incantation. Her voice wavered at first, but the words seemed to take on a life of their own, spilling from her lips in a steady stream. The wind rose to a deafening roar, extinguishing the candles and plunging the clearing into darkness. The whispers grew louder, mingling with guttural growls and a bone-chilling laughter that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Emma's voice faltered as the air grew icy. Nathan shouted, but his words were swallowed by the cacophony. A shadow began to coalesce beneath the oak tree, its form twisting and writhing like smoke. Margaret threw the sage into the fire they had built, shouting her own incantation to banish the entity. The shadow paused, as if considering her defiance before lunging toward her. she screamed, her body convulsing as the entity seemed to seep into her very being. Emma and Nathan watched in horror as Margaret's eyes turned black, her face contorted in agony. With a final guttural cry, she collapsed to the ground. "Run!" Emma screamed, grabbing Nathan's arm. They bolted through the forest, the shadowy figure in pursuit. The trees seemed to close in around them, their gnarled branches clawing at their clothes and skin. The whispers became a deafening chorus, urging them to stop, to surrender. Emma tripped, falling hard against the forest floor. Nathan turned to help her, but the shadowy figure loomed behind him. Its hollow eyes gleamed with malice as it reached out a clawed hand. "No!" Emma screamed, clutching the journal. Desperation overcame her, and she hurled the book at the entity. The journal burst into flames midair, the fire consuming the shadow in an explosion of light. For a moment the forest was silent. Then the shadows began to retreat, and the oppressive weight lifted. Emma and Nathan staggered out of the forest, battered but alive. Back in town, Emma and Nathan tried to make sense of what had happened. Margaret's body was never found, and the journal had been reduced to ash. But the mark on Emma's arm remained, a constant reminder of the entity's lingering presence. Nathan uploaded the footage to his channel, hoping to warn others about the forest. The video went viral, sparking debates about its authenticity. But for Emma and Nathan, the horrors were all too real. As they tried to move on with their lives, they couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows seemed darker, whispers lingered in the wind, and the forest loomed on the edge of their minds, a haunting reminder of what they had unleashed. The weeks following their escape from the forest were unbearable for Emma and Nathan. They hoped the ordeal was behind them, but the horrors persisted. Shadows danced in the corners of their vision, and at night, the whispers returned, growing louder with each passing day. The mark on Emma's arm had spread, now resembling a lattice of burnt veins. Nathan, once so eager to exploit their experience for content, was a shell of his former self. He hadn't touched the camera since their last video. "It's still out there," he whispered one night, staring blankly out the window. "It's waiting." Emma didn't reply. She knew he was right. Desperation led Emma to revisit Margaret's archives. Among the historian's scattered belongings, she found a hidden compartment in the old desk. Inside was a letter addressed to Abigail Bishop's descendants. The letter, brittle with age, revealed that Abigail had not merely chronicled the horrors of Salem's curse, she had attempted to end it. The final pages of the letter were chilling. "The entity cannot be destroyed by mortal hands, but it can be bound. To do so, one must willingly offer a piece of their soul. I failed in my attempt, but perhaps someday another will succeed." Emma's stomach churned. Abigail's failure had unleashed the entity on Salem and her family. Now Emma and Nathan were caught in the same cycle. But Abigail had left instructions, a ritual far more complex than the first, requiring immense sacrifice. Emma traced her fingers over the words. "A piece of the soul," she murmured. Nathan leaned over her shoulder, his breath shaky. "What does that mean?" "It means one of us won't survive this." Nathan's face turned ashen. "You're not seriously considering this?" "What choice do we have?" Emma snapped. "It won't stop until we're dead or worse." "We could leave," Nathan said, his voice trembling. "Get as far away from Salem as possible." Emma shook her head. "You've seen the footage, Nathan. It's not bound to Salem anymore. It's bound to us." The argument grew heated. Nathan's fear morphed into desperation. "Why does it have to be us? Why can't someone else deal with it?" Emma's gaze hardened. "Because Abigail tried to pass the responsibility, and look what happened. We can't make the same mistake." Nathan turned away, his silence damning. The ritual required 3 components: an artifact of personal significance, the ash of a burned journal page, and a willing soul to stand as an anchor. Emma knew what she had to do, but Nathan's hesitation lingered like a shadow over her resolve. The two returned to the forest at dusk, the air heavy with tension. Emma carried the charred remains of Abigail's journal, wrapped in cloth. Around her neck hung a locket her mother had given her, the artifact she would offer. Nathan trailed behind, silent and sullen. The whispers began before they reached the clearing, swirling around them in an eerie chorus. At the center of the ritual site, Emma knelt and began to arrange the components. Nathan paced the perimeter, his paranoia mounting. "This isn't going to work," he muttered. "It has to," Emma said, her voice steady. "If it doesn't, we're both dead." Emma lit the candles and began the incantation, her voice trembling but resolute. The wind rose and the forest seemed to come alive. The shadows coalesced, forming the monstrous figure they had encountered before. Its hollow eyes glowed with malice as it stepped into the circle. The ground beneath them trembled. Nathan shouted something, but Emma couldn't hear him over the cacophony. She held up the locket, her hands shaking, and recited the final words of the ritual. The entity lunged toward her, its claws outstretched, but as it crossed the circle's boundary, a blinding light erupted from the locket. The entity screamed, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. Emma felt the pull immediately. The ritual was working, but it was taking more than she had anticipated. The mark on her arm burned as the entity's shadow was drawn into the locket piece by piece. Nathan's voice broke through the noise. "Emma, stop!" She turned to see him rushing toward her, his face contorted with anguish. But it was too late. The light consumed her, and with a final, deafening roar, the entity was gone. The forest fell silent. Nathan sat at the edge of the clearing, the locket clutched in his hands. Emma was gone. No body, no trace, only the charred circle where she had knelt. The whispers had ceased, but the weight of her sacrifice hung heavy in the air. Weeks passed before Nathan could bring himself to return to Salem. He uploaded a final video, a tribute to Emma and her bravery. The footage from the ritual remained untouched. Some things, he decided, were not meant to be shared. Years later, Nathan moved far from Salem, trying to rebuild his life. But on quiet nights, he swore he could hear her voice, faint and distant, calling his name. One morning, he awoke to find the locket on his nightstand, the burnished metal warm to the touch. Inside was a single word, etched in an unsteady hand: "Beware." The curse was bound, but for how long? Thank you for listening to my story. If you want to hear more scary stories, please like and subscribe to my channel.